Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we continue with the compilation videos which are aimed at people who are working or people who are driving or people who just have a heck of a lot of time and want something on in the background. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Please check out the KCC Discord linked in the description down below. There you can talk to me and a whole bunch of KCC fans who hang out there on a regular basis. I look forward to seeing you there. Our first story today comes to us from Asian Clooney. Boss tries to give disciplinary action for working too hard. Let's jump right in. Midway through my career, I found myself working for the most prominent private college in my state. I was in the IT department and was in charge of maintaining a few servers and all of the technology in classrooms. Every summer, we would receive our budget for the year, and the part of the budget I managed was spent mostly on upgrading the audio and video presentation systems in the classrooms, and most of that work had to take place during the summer. This is fine, normally, but our college administration had created a ticking time bomb for me a few years before. They had decided to spend about $100,000 on a few classrooms, but did not allocate any money in our budget to replace that equipment when it would eventually fail. I had been there for 5 years, and now that equipment was starting to fail. Increasing our budget was not an option, despite faculty growing to depend on the equipment in these spaces. I was left to figure out how to make the same budget replace all of the equipment in those spaces, as well as the normal set of classrooms that would need to be upgraded elsewhere. Fine, I was up for the challenge. I had to simplify and purchase more value brand of equipment and do extra work to cut corners. A couple of weeks of shipping delays for the majority of the equipment saw me with roughly 1 month to rip out, replace, rewire, and configure around 15 classrooms, as well as update and test all of the existing classrooms within about a month before the semester began. Realizing the amount of work ahead of me, I began working. I came in every day of the week for 28 days straight, working 8 to 10 hours to ensure that when the semester began, the professors would have working equipment. I was salary, so I did not have to clock in. This gave me the freedom of schedule to work as little or as much as required. I worked myself sick and was literally sick at the end of the 28 days. My supervisor was a guy we recently hired, let's call him Gus. Near the beginning of the semester, while testing equipment, I realized that the audio driver in a common model of computer we have in the classrooms was corrupted. Investigating it, I realized that the computer manufacturer had corrupted drivers on their web server where we downloaded it from. I asked my supervisor who was in charge of managing the image deployment server to rebuild the image with a non-corrupt version of the driver I had provided him. He said he would. I swing by the next day and ask him if he had completed the rebuild. He had not. I tell him I really need it as the semester loomed closer and closer, and he tells me he will work on it. Next day, nothing. Day after that, nothing. Finally, he figures it out and I continue my work. He must not have liked being pressured, and perhaps the perception that he was incompetent, he was, must have gotten to him. He decides to power trip and call me into his office and ask why I was working so much. I explained the administrative oversight a few years prior, shipping delays, cheaper equipment, extra required work, and his delay of a working image. I tell him, look, I came in day after day after day asking for that rebuilt image. Each time I said day, I am poking my finger straight down on the edge of his desk, enough that it makes a sound to emphasize that those delays hurt the work I was doing. He wanted to find some personal failing that he could pull out some form of disciplinary action around. I gave him none. Eventually, he ran out of ideas and I left his office, not thinking much of it. Gus, however, was a brown-noser of the highest order. He would follow our IT director like a puppy. He joined a band with my IT director, so my work situation was not exactly fair. The semester began and not a single issue in all of the classrooms was reported. I was proud of the work I was able to complete given the challenges. The second day of the semester, my IT director calls me into his office. There, Gus is sitting beside him, and they both want to talk to me. I don't like the looks of this. My IT director starts asking me about why I was working so much. I explained to him, as I did Gus, the various factors that made this summer's work extra challenging. This destroyed any valid criticism they could muster. Gus goes on to say that he innocently inquired about my work and that I became violent, talking about the gesture I made on his desk, illustrating his failure to do his work in a timely manner. I demonstrate exactly what I did on the IT director's desk to show how ridiculous the claim was. My IT director wanted to exert his authority, and they would not stop until they had something to discipline me with. Nothing I would say would change the result. I was to be in trouble for whatever transgression they imagined up in this meeting. I make sure to point out how long it took Gus to do the small task that I depended on, knowing I could have completed it in about an hour. He was incompetent. My IT director then alludes to the fact that I should respect Gus more, as he is my supervisor. Screw it, I think to myself. I then tell my director, it is as if Justin Bieber was trying to teach you about music theory. It is only going to piss you off. This sudden, sharp, and, in my opinion, hilarious comparison was too funny. Both Gus and my IT director immediately laughed their butts off, even though Gus was the subject of this insult. Once they had stopped laughing, my IT director put on a more serious tone. He says that I could manage my time better, despite the unique circumstances of this summer's work. His voice gets really soft and slow while he's talking to me now. This is a trick he forgot he told me that he uses in arguments to make the other person seem like they are out of control. It is condescending, as if spoken to a child, and now he's using it on me. He tells me that he wants me to take some time management class, also to take a couple days off and think about it. I just want you to think about it. However, he is going to need my keys and badge. Cue malicious compliance. At this point, he has provided me enough evidence that this is not a job I want to stay at. The absurdity of working so hard and for 28 days straight on salary with no extra pay and to be rewarded with a disciplinary action was too much. In that moment, I had thought about it. Without saying anything, I hand over my badge. I took all of the many keys off my keyring and set them on his desk. I have thought about it, I tell him, in the exact soft and condescending tone he used with me. And you can keep the keys and badge, I told him with the biggest wry smile on my face. I then walk to my office. He follows me, and I notice his eyes had become glassy, as if he was hurt by the situation unfolding before him. He expected me to capitulate and accept his punishment for a job well done, with each time becoming increasingly desperate, and I kept repeating, I have thought about it. He disappears back to his office with his little minion Gus to discuss damage control. I quickly pen an email to all my other coworkers letting them know I was leaving and that I enjoyed working with them. I had to work quick as I knew they would shut down all my accounts very quickly. I packed up my personal effects and left. Gus and my IT director offered to help me, trying to walk back the situation with some small gesture of goodwill, but I was gone. I had been there for 5 years, but I was willing to walk away the moment he tried to treat me so poorly. I found out a little later that the week before I left, a programmer we hired left after he treated her poorly too. I was not aware of the reason she left when she did, but our office manager shared that she quit abruptly like me, without anything lined up given his behavior. About a year later, I hear from the office manager that the IT director had left. Rumor is he was primarily working for another company while in his office at the college, effectively double dipping or making money for 2 jobs while only doing one. He had been caught doing so and was warned by the administrator to stop. He opted to leave instead of owning up to his own dubious behavior. My only regret is that I didn't leave that job sooner. Imagine doing all that work on your own time knowing you're not going to get any more money for it and then being punished for your outstanding performance. Wow. OP, I think you definitely outgrew that job, and I hope whatever job you get into in the future can take advantage of the skills that you have, because it seems like you'd be an asset to have on any team. Do me a quick favor and take a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're actually not subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. This next story comes to us from Links in Your Sinks, grocery store nonsense. Let's jump right in. This happened a few years back. I worked for a large grocery chain for 12 years. In that time, I worked all holidays, came in early, stayed late, rarely called out sick, and came in on my days off. I was treated like complete crap near the tail end of my time there, when we had gotten a new co-manager at the store. He acted like I wasn't a team player. He stalked my Facebook if I called out sick, trying to catch me in a lie since he was used to me coming in and working when I was sick most of the time, which I know is completely terrible in and of itself. In those rare occasions that I would call out, he tried to require me to have a doctor's note to excuse the one day I would miss. All while this is happening, people would come in late with no call, be no call no shows, and be out sick for weeks with management knowing full well that these people would be on vacation. All this with zero disciplinary action. Cue malicious compliance number 1. The store started cracking down hard on OT, so they were used to me coming in early and staying late to make sure all tasks were completed with no complaints from management, since it meant that it freed up other people, themselves included, from having to do the work. My department, which was just me, was constantly praised by corporate as being the best looking and cared for department they had seen in the entire Northwest. I took pride in my job and what I did, but this soon became me working just my scheduled hours. It resulted in incorrect orders, a fall behind in keeping the shelves stocked, and a massive amount of overstock adding up in the back room. People that were clueless as to what we had in the back room were tasked with fulfilling my orders and ordering things they thought we needed but did not. It quickly became a crap show. They started letting me come in whenever I wanted and staying as long as necessary after about a month of fall behind. Cue malicious compliance number 2. I was really tired of being treated so poorly for the amount of time and effort I put in to making my department perfect. I applied at a company that my friend had been trying to get me to come to for at least 5 years. Wasn't expecting to get the job, as I had very little experience in that company, since most of my working career was at a grocery store. But I figured, hey, the worst that would happen is I wouldn't get it and I still have a full-time job with my current employer. Well, they absolutely loved me and quickly hired me on full-time. I put in notice at the store that I had accepted a job elsewhere but was willing to stay there part-time to train whomever they hired to take my spot. 5 months go by and they hadn't even posted my position. They did nothing to fill my place. I ended up putting my 2-week notice in as I was so burned out working 60 plus hours a week with my 2 jobs with no scheduled days off between the 2. I made sure that I was available to the grocery store for a huge holiday, and my last day would be the day after. This lovely co-manager, mentioned earlier, thought he was hurting me by not scheduling me for the last week of my notice, which this holiday fell in. Other management tried to backtrack this move and tried to get me to come in anyway, but alas, the schedule had been posted. And as per union guidelines, they cannot change your schedule once posted without consent from the employee. I shrugged at the co-manager and said, sorry, I wasn't on the schedule, so I made plans with my family since I hadn't had this holiday off for years. The rest of management was furious at this guy for trying to pull this power move, which blew up in his face. I cashed out my banked vacation time before leaving, which only capped out at 3 weeks pay, but still, it was my final FU. I hear from old friends and colleagues that this co-manager was demoted to a clerk in a small department. I work now for a far superior company who values their employees and compensates hard work. I had taken a huge pay cut when I took this new position, but within 3 years, I was making more than I had been making in 12 years at the grocery store. Biannual bonuses, paid vacation, a massive amount of paid sick and vacation time, and a considerable amount of less stress. OP, just think, if this new manager hadn't come in and made your life miserable in that store, you wouldn't have been looking for another job. You said so in the comments yourself. So you've managed to get yourself into a better position because of that jerk manager. I think the only thing I would have done differently from OP in this case is I wouldn't have stayed in that job for 5 months. That is just absurd. This next story comes to us from Representative Elk 90, Snob Instructor, and Poor Student. Let's jump right in. A friend recently reminded me of an incident from a while back. About a dozen years ago, I was on an outdoor safety training course, canoeing or kayaking or something related. The instructor was being a bit of a tool and going on about buying the best equipment possible, and that money should not be an excuse. Later, he took out his fancy knife, told us about its cost, about its features, and his favorite parts. He spent ages talking about the way it was forged, the type of metal, and how it was honed, blah blah blah. Then he asked everyone to do the same. Awkwardly, everyone complied and talked through their knife. He would then provide feedback to them and told them what was wrong with their knife. Finally, my turn rolled around. I was a broke-butt student, and my knife was from the bargain bin, but was carefully chosen for its task, an emergency. I pulled it out and then proceeded to provide great detail about the knife, first explaining that the front half had a sharp blade that was great for cutting cheese to spread mayonnaise or butter or sharpen a stick. The back half was serrated. This was great for cutting over ripe tomatoes or rope. The strange hook on the front was great for opening plastic packaging. The blade length was great for cutting open the bread roll in one cut. The toggle was useful for holding sunglasses and provide access in an emergency. The hard plastic handle was heat resistant when I needed to quickly rescue the fallen sausage from the raging fire. Finally, stating that the price was great because if it was ever lost or damaged, I could easily replace. Everyone laughed except the instructor. He was enraged, first picking on that I used it day to day. I simply told him I could resharpen it, then picking on that it may be damaged when I need it for a real emergency. What is the point of equipment you don't use? This went on for a while. Finally, we arrived at quickly sticking it in the fire to save the fallen sausage. He was worried that I could change the temper and it would break. Finally, this interaction drew to a close. After about 15 years, I still have this knife. The blade is sharp and handle undamaged. It goes on every one of my adventures. Honestly, I think that person just wanted to show off their money by showing that expensive knife and then talking all about it, and then talking down everyone else's, because in a true survival situation, the best knife is the one you have with you, regardless of how much it costs. This next story comes to us from Ancient Educator 76. Don't lie to the customers. Buzzkill Bill versus Captain Smartbutt. Let's jump right in. Enter yet another chapter of the Smartbutt Chronicles. So me, Captain Smartbutt, am taking an order from a customer numbered 232 for the day, and I've been standing in the same 3 foot by 2 foot rectangle of space, back to back, with another set of butt cheeks rubbing against mine unwillingly. My colleagues, as if to further punctuate an already unsubtle statement communicating how cramped it really is at the drive-thru window. I've been standing in the same space for longer than I ever do as an Algebra 1 teacher, my day job. When I teach, I have to hold my pee for long periods of time, epochs even, but I move around the classroom and sweat it out. I don't have that opportunity at the register, brow sweat notwithstanding. I'm all but doing a hybrid of the pee-pee dance and the hokey pokey. You hold your urine in, don't let your urine out. You hold your urine in and you shut your effing mouth. If you think you've got rights, you're a mother effing clown. That's what it's all about. When I gotta pee this bad, I get weird. Like, if we let Y represent how weird I behave and X represent how badly I need to pee, in terms of minutes past pee time, the equation would be as follows. Y equals 5x plus 10. Because, let's face it, I started off a little weird to begin with. That's why the equation starts at plus 10. So here I am talking to a stranger I'm speaking to as if I've known him for a lifetime, rattling off the Powerade flavors he so quizzically inquired about, and I could just tell by this guy's vocal demeanor that he had a sense of humor. So I have a little fun with the myriad of flavors available. We have orange, cherry, raspberry, avocado, grape, lime, strawberry, lemon, and fruit punch. I really didn't think he was going to notice my inventing a flavor, but almost as if on cue, he sputters, "Did you say avocado?" He seemed equally excited and entertained by the prospect of such a flavor. So much so that I'm sure he'd have ordered it out of sheer curiosity, but alas, enter Buzzkill Bill, my night manager, who is listening to the orders along with the rest of us, who thinks he's the word police. Like I have some telemarketing script. I don't. We totally don't. Pipes in through the buddy system button, where the employees can talk to each other unheard by customers, and starts to chide me, eventually saying, "OP, don't lie to the customer." Enter, oh god, finally, Malicious Compliance. I get the novel idea to decide as I'm about to cough or fart, one of the two, and either of those will start a river of pee a-flowin' to tell the truth, to not lie. I then say to the best customer I've had in a while, hey, since you ordered light ice, they're gonna make me fill up the remaining space with water, is that okay? Oh, and also, sorry if I'm weird, man, I've had to pee since 6:30, it's now 9:38. Not gonna lie. The guy retorts, yeah bro, thanks, please don't do that. All soda and ice if you can, I'll pay extra. Plus, after I get to the window, you better go to the restroom right after, man. But wait if you can. I'll be here. I don't know how or by what miracle my manager did not hear me say that last part, but before I knew it, the guy was talking to me, asking how life's going, and gave me a $20 tip. If I didn't know better, I'd swear it was Theo Vaughn. I thanked him immensely, had a laugh about everything, and walked away thankful that things ended the way they did. Speaking of ends, I split the tip with my butt partner. Buzzkill Bill got word that we got a tip after all that, and he was fuming. The kind of anger that could only spawn from a total buzzkill. It really should be a crime having to deal with a manager like that, but I think the bigger crime in this story is the fact that OP being an algebra teacher has to work a second job at a fast food place to make ends meet. That is absolute bullcrap. This next story comes to us from Gerberan. Months of paid vacation? I'll take it. Let's jump right in. This happened in Germany, so the laws are different to other countries, especially to the USA. I was working for a family-owned business, about 40 employees, a couple years ago. My time there wasn't the best because I had huge problems with my boss's younger brother. He was on early pension and officially just working on a small part-time contract, while in reality working full-time, with getting most of his salary out of pocket. That I was hired meant for him that he just worked about half the hours he worked before, and having a huge pay cut because of me pissed him off, as you can imagine. He talked bad about me behind my back all the time and tried to get me fired. Dealing with him was a pain in the butt, but I didn't have to deal with him too often. My coworkers were nice and the pay was good, so I didn't care about finding another job, despite my relationship with my boss and his wife getting worse over time too. My boss even came to me with 2 deliveries to customers because his brother probably told him I would waste time during the deliveries. One day I had to do a delivery with my boss's wife's car because the company car I normally use was at the inspection that day, and the timing couldn't have been worse. I scratched the fender of her car on a wall when I tried to get out of the parking spot. The scratch was barely noticeable, but I immediately reported it to one of my coworkers, so no one can say that I tried to put it under the rug. I did the delivery, and when I came back, my boss's wife already waited for me. She went completely crazy, screamed at me for ruining her car without inspecting the damages before, and said that she will take the money for the repair from my paycheck. I told her that I won't pay for anything because the insurance will pay for it anyway, and that's what made her snap, and she slapped me in the face. I immediately turned around, grabbed my stuff, clocked out, and went to the doctor to get a sick note because of mental stress, which I threw into the company's mailbox in the evening. 2 days later, I got a termination letter in the mail and had to laugh while reading just the first sentence. We are terminating your work contract immediately, or if this isn't applicable, within the legal 30 days. To people who aren't familiar with German workers' law, it's illegal to terminate a contract immediately and within the legal period of time in the same termination letter. You can do one or another, but not both at the same time. So I went to the government office to apply for unemployment and hired a lawyer to sue my boss for illegal termination. Over 2.5 months went by until I got a court date, and my boss was really pissed when the judge explained to him that the termination was illegal and that he had to pay me for the last 2.5 months. But the illegal termination wasn't the only mistake he made. The judge gave me 2 options. I can accept an immediate termination on that day and leave without compensation, or I can have a 2-month salary compensation, but I have to work another month for the company. My boss laughed and said that I'm scared to go back to work and that it makes him happy that I leave the court unemployed. He didn't look that happy anymore when I asked him, "Why should I be scared? Do you want to beat me like your wife did?" So I took option B and went to work the next morning. My boss's brother already waited for me to hand me the termination letter and made comments about how difficult the next 30 days would be for me. I checked the termination letter, and after I've seen that everything was right, I just said that I'm not feeling well, turned around and went to my doctor to get another 30-day sick note because of burnout. So at the end, I had a 3.5 months vacation with full pay, 2 months salary compensation, and he had to pay for my lawyer too because he lost at court. I could have sued my boss's wife for the slap too, but that would have been too much stress for maybe a couple €100. I feel like OP missed a big opportunity here. I think I probably would have filed for assault charges and then done the illegal termination, and then include the police report for the assault charge in the complaint for the termination. It's a hostile work environment. You're gonna get paid out, buddy. This next story comes to us from Goth Angel Blood. Want me to make my quota? Hope you like cross-dressers. Now before we jump right in, I'd like to personally dedicate this story to Gordon, who commented this incredibly bigoted comment on the last video that mentioned LGBTQ. Screw you, Gordon. And with that out of the way, let's jump right in. Posted once before about a situation when I was teaching, but thought I would go back to one of the original acts of malicious compliance that happened while I was working my way through grad school. Once upon a time, in order to make ends meet during uni, I took a job working at a bridal shop. This shop involved mostly walk-ins who would buy dresses directly off the rack. If you're from the States, you probably know the one I'm talking about. When I took the job, it was explained to me that the majority of my salary was commission-based. That didn't bother me because even the base pay was decent at the time. Besides, the lowest financial band to qualify for commission required me to sell 10 dresses a week. Easy. During my initial interview, I explained to my manager that I would need to get off work at 3 p.m. on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays to attend all my classes. Now, if you've ever worked a retail job at all, you know that the daytime hours, Monday through Thursday, as well as those evening hours, tend to be very low volume. The majority of all sales are made Friday through Sunday, with the casual shoppers coming in on Saturday and the serious shoppers coming in on Sunday. Therefore, my manager had no problem with my needing those nights off every week. My schedule was set as Wednesday, Thursday, Friday during the day, as well as all day Saturday and Sunday. However, within 2 weeks of being there, it became apparent that one of the older women I worked with did have a problem with my schedule. She disliked working the weekday evenings and days because those hours didn't typically result in sales. Instead, most of our time was spent cleaning and restocking inventory. At first, it started as a few nasty comments here and there on the floor. Then, she started borrowing items from my bridal drawer. Belly bumps, pins, hair ties, tissues, cough drops. Eventually, she started telling the hostess to remove my name from the incoming bride inventory, claiming I was busy with another client when I was not. The final straw came when she had to work one of my daytime shifts. I was studying for an exam, and one of my high-dollar brides came in. Instead of ringing the sale through with my name as the consultant as per policy, the computer automatically registers who is the consultant. She removed my name and put her name as the consultant instead. That one sale was over $200 in commission. I was livid. Of course, I brought it up to my manager, and that did not go as planned. Because the other consultant had more seniority than I did, my manager flipped the tables on me and claimed that maybe if I pulled my weight and pushed through more in sales, I wouldn't be in this position. Apparently, my refusal to take evening shifts during the week was upsetting to other consultants because they had to work those low volume hours. WTF, I was working all the daytime shifts. Manager started badgering me that I needed to find a way to pull in more business for the bridal shop and close more sales, or she would demote me to a stockroom employee. Okay, want me to bring in more business? Game on. Now, I knew from previous interactions in the shop that both my manager and this consultant took a moral issue with anyone associated with the Alphabet Mafia, LGBTQ+. For instance, we had a lesbian couple come in once looking for 2 wedding gowns, and the manager made them so uncomfortable with her religious talk that both brides left. Another time, the consultant had refused to dress a male in a prom gown because it was an atrocity and disgusted her. I, however, didn't give a darn what you were doing with your merchandise after you purchased it, and I had a lot of friends in the Alphabet Mafia. I immediately called one of my good friends who was a well-known local drag queen and asked him if he knew anyone in need of a special occasion gown. I offered special consultations, complete with bra fittings, during the daytime hours I worked. The first day, 3 drag queens showed up. The next, it was 4. Saturday involved 5 drag queens, 3 lesbian brides, and a few flamboyantly gay men there for support. It may have gotten out of hand on Sunday when a whole van of drag queens drove in from over an hour away just to see me and start a ruckus with the religious nuts in the store. I had to take half of the salons to dress them, and I made a huge amount in commissions that week. The next week, a good number of my clientele continued to come into the shop, always insisting on me and demanding I be listed as their consultant. The manager was ticked and the other consultant was disgusted, but what could they really do? All my manager asked me to do was increase my sales, which I had done in spades. I ultimately left just a few weeks later, which was planned as I had graduated and taken a professorship at a state school some hours away. But I did learn from the assistant manager at the store that the Alphabet Mafia continued to flamboyantly frequent that store for their bridal and formal wear needs until it ultimately closed down 6 months later. Remember to tip your waitresses and don't ever piss off the drag queens. When you're in business, you shouldn't be caring who somebody loves. You shouldn't be caring what color they are either. It's only a question to you of, if their credit is clean and the cash is green, we can do business. Gotta be honest, OP's boss sounds like a bit of a moron though, because the drag queens are gonna spend a lot of money on formal wear because they do wear it on a regular basis. This next story comes to us from Lord of the Memes 18. Each person has their own job, if you say so. Let's jump right in. So a few days ago, me and 2 of the people I work with were replacing nozzles and hoses on one of the pivots on the farm we work on. For privacy purposes, we'll call one person Johnny and the other Mike. I'll be Horatio. Anyway, what ended up happening was that Johnny would get up top on the ladder to put the hose in. Mike would hand him the hose and cut the hose when it was ready and drove the 4-wheeler that had all the stuff. I was crimping the hoses and putting the nozzles in. Now, it was a windy day, which meant from time to time, I would have to hold the ladder for Johnny just to try and keep it stable. But that meant that the crimping and nozzles weren't being put in. At first, Mike would crimp them and then I would go through and add the nozzles, and once I caught up, I would start crimping again. But after a while, Mike stopped crimping while I was holding the ladder, so I started to fall behind. This went on for most of the pivot, but it reached a point where Johnny took a water break with his dog and asked me to hold the ladder up, as it was windy and we didn't want to put it back up again. So Johnny is taking his deserved break. I'm holding the ladder, and Mike, well, he was just sitting on the 4-wheeler on his phone. Turns out there were 3 hoses behind us that needed crimped and a nozzle added to them. I would do them while I was waiting, but I was holding the ladder. So I asked Mike if he would please at least crimp those while we're waiting. His response, sure, but you'll drive the 4-wheeler and do the hose and get it up there. Basically just saying we would switch jobs, which I didn't want to do. So I was just like, whatever, and went back to holding the ladder. I'm glad I just let it go then, because about an hour later, while Mike was getting Johnny some things he needed, one of his boxes on the 4-wheeler fell off and spilled all the little parts everywhere. So Mike starts gathering them up, and I'm watching as I'm holding the ladder. The timing was perfect, because Johnny was ready to move on and start the next one. But Mike was occupied and couldn't drive the 4-wheeler up. So naturally he asks me, Horatio, would you please drive the 4-wheeler up and start that? You can probably see where this is going. Oh, but I can't, Mike. That's part of your job. Besides, I gotta hold the ladder in this wind, so I'm busy anyway. Mike did seem like the message got through to him, and it did. He seemed to regret asking me and also regret what he said. I did end up moving the 4-wheeler forward, but just because I was ready to get done. I let Mike do the rest though, and went back to crimping and putting the nozzles on. I say the message got through because towards the end of the pivot, He did crimp them instead of leave them. But oh, it felt so good to throw that back at him, because it's not exactly the first time he's just lazed around like that and left things to others. Hopefully this will help with future situations, but I'm not holding my breath. Well, OP, it sounds to me like you were getting hosed by this guy, so you just put a crimp into his request. Completely reasonable. This next story comes to us from Wade Wilson Watts. Your only job is to help customers. Let's jump right in. Years ago, I worked at an office supply store. We had idiot manager after idiot manager cycle through and come up with dumb ideas to try and make the store run better. And this is one of those dumb ideas. The idea was that between certain hours, I think 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., we were only allowed to directly help customers. No restocking shelves, no unloading the trucks. I was in charge of changing and checking prices, but wasn't allowed during those hours. Any of those tasks can easily be done while still being accessible to customers, but apparently that's not good enough. The rest of the staff decided to sneakily do their work when the manager wasn't looking, otherwise they couldn't get everything done. Luckily, I was able to finish my work outside of these hours, so I decided to follow this ridiculous rule. At first, I stood up front and turned myself into our Walmart-style greeter, but I hated it and didn't really feel that it was following the rule, as customers typically don't like being asked questions the second they walk in the door. Eventually, I found a spot in the back of the store where I can see the front door and I post myself there. I do absolutely nothing besides stand there and stare at the front door. When a customer comes in, I track them with my eyes, see what aisle they walk down, and go ask if they need help. When I finish helping them, or more often after they say they don't need anything, I walk back to my spot in the back of the store and continue staring at the front door. Sometimes I stand there for less than a minute, but sometimes I just stand there for 15 minutes or more. I do this for 3 hours a day, 4 days of the week that I'm there, for I don't even know how many weeks. One of my favorite memories of this time was a staring contest with my manager. I was in my spot in the back of the store, and he was near the front of the store when he spotted me standing there, not even remotely pretending to work. He stares at me across the store, and I stare right back, hoping he'll confront me. After all, I'm not allowed to do anything besides help customers, and I know I've approached every customer in the store. Unfortunately, he didn't, and I lost the staring contest after a few minutes when a customer came in and I had to go approach them. When I got back to my spot, he had already moved on. Eventually, I quit. I was given my final warning for my attitude. No customer complaints or problems with incorrect prices. I was just rude to the managers. If you don't know, final warning means next time I did something wrong, I would be fired. And I realized my managers weren't going to get smarter, and I wasn't going to learn to bite my tongue. So it was best that I move on. Of course, they didn't realize how good at my job I was, and my replacement was terrible, partially because they didn't have me train him before I left. Price tags all over the store were wrong for months. You know, the last thing a manager wants to hear is that their idea isn't absolutely wonderful. OP, if I were you, I would have stayed in that spot at the back of the store and continued the staring contest with the manager just because I could. Somebody else could deal with the customer that came in the door. This next story comes to us from Nooner827. Ask me to review a meaningless purchase? Sure, let's jump right in. I've been dealing with a lot of stress recently and got an email first thing that just increased that stress level. After sending my reply to that one, I got a new email notification. I was kinda wound up already and thought this was an answer to my previous one. Rather, it was an email from a major US-based hardware store asking me to review a recent purchase. Now, I've just moved across the country, one of my above-noted stressors, and I haven't used this store much in the past few years, but I had intended it to become my go-to hardware store now that it's much closer. In just a few weeks of living at my new location, I've spent hundreds of dollars there. So what did they want me to review? The garage door opener I bought? The smart home light switches? Maybe the staple gun? Nope. They wanted me to review the Fast and Tight number 6 1¼ inch bugle coarse thread drywall screws. Screws! You want me to review screws? honestly, my decision matrix when purchasing screws consists of a little more than, is it a screw? Is it the right size? If yes to both, get it. Being in an agitated state, I decided to blow off some steam with the following review for them wasting my time. From the Screwmaster, a screw like no other. Let me tell you something about these number 6 1¼ inch bugle coarse thread drywall screws. They are absolutely amazing. The design is like nothing I've ever encountered in my life. On one end, you have a pointy little bit that pierces the wall utilizing a simple machine principle, the wedge, an idea originated with the Greek philosopher Archimedes around the 3rd century BC, who studied the Archimedean simple machines. Then it uses another simple machine, the inclined plane. The genius of this inclined plane is that they've wrapped it around an axle so that as you twist the device, it goes further and further into the wall with each twist. Then there's a flanged portion at the top that lets you know when to stop twisting. The real coup de grace is embedded in that flange. These screws have not one, but 2 notches expertly molded into the top, effectively doubling the torque you apply with the specialized application tool not included. This tool is called a Phillips head screwdriver, derived, I believe, from the Greek letter phi, and while readily available, is not to be confused with the flathead screwdriver. These screws are not compatible with flathead screwdrivers. Yes, I know that Phillips head screwdrivers are named after a guy, but I thought it was funnier to go back to referencing the Greeks. I guess the last laugh is on me, however. My account appears to be locked, and I'm unable to reset the password, but at least I got a laugh out of it. OP, quick, go back to that store and buy yourself some duct tape and some rope. I want to know what you could do with a review for those. Ah yes, duct tape, 10 out of 10. Using this, nobody's been able to escape my basement yet. This next story comes to us from District Equivalent 79. You want to talk to my manager? Okay, let's jump right in. This happened about 13 years ago. I was a field service engineer for a national retail chain. Basically, I was the IT guy who drove around in a company vehicle servicing the computer networks in the stores. The way the company was organized, there were corporate employees and then there were retail employees. Being a corporate employee, I received corporate stock as a small part of my salary, and my starting pay was 3 times the rate of any store manager. Because I was always putting out fires, I often found myself in the awkward position of dealing with store managers who honestly thought that they were the store owners and that I was just the hired help. This was truly ironic, as I actually did own a very small piece of the corporation, whereas the average store manager did not. One day, I got orders to replace a server in a store not too far from my house. I worked out of my house but kept parts in the truck, and also the back room of another store nearby. So I show up to the store where the server needed to be replaced. It was my second stop of 3 scheduled for that day. I walk in the store wearing my very obvious corporate uniform and name tag with logo. The store owner, retail manager, instantly demands to know WTF am I doing in her store. I get this all the time, nothing new. I calmly explain that my boss wants me to upgrade one of the store servers' hardware replacement, and I even show her where it is that I will be working. I explain that it will take about an hour and that the POS registers might go offline for about 5 minutes. She isn't happy, but she reluctantly allows me into the room where the server is, and I start working. When I'm just about done, the POS registers go down as I am switching them to the new server, which is not fully hooked up yet. It was at this point where I realized I've forgotten to bring in a couple of cables that I need to finish hooking the new server into the store network. So I run out to the truck to get the required cables. I'm gone about 2 minutes. When I get back, the store manager is sitting at the table in front of the server, and she's got food spread out all over the table. The server is under the table. I tell the store manager I need to finish hooking up the server, gesturing under the table. The store manager tells me I'll have to come back in an hour after her lunch break. I'm shocked into total silence. Then, a cashier bursts into the room, panicked that the registers aren't working and the checkout lines are getting backed up. I explain to the manager that I have to fix the server now, or the registers will not work. The manager tells me I should have thought of that before I started working in her lunch break area. I calmly tell the store manager that she'll have to take a break later or find somewhere else to eat her lunch. She tells me I'm rude and incompetent and demands to speak to my manager immediately. Okie dokie. I call up my manager using my corporate-issued iPhone and quickly explain the situation, and then walk into the server room to hand the iPhone to the store manager. While she's on the phone with my manager, I head out to the front of the store to explain and apologize that the registers are going to be down for a few more minutes. I can't hear exactly what the store manager is telling to my manager, but I can tell that it's a heated conversation, and I clearly hear the word fired mentioned a few times. It's clear that the store owner, retail manager, wants me to be fired for daring to try to interrupt her lunch break. Unfortunately for her, my district supervisor was about 5 to 6 levels above the retail district manager, so the store manager was complaining loudly about interrupting my work to the manager of her manager's manager. A few minutes later, the store manager walks out of the room awkwardly balancing bits and pieces of her lunch spread. I immediately go back to work, getting the new server up and running and rebooting the POS registers so that they will sync on the new server and cashiers can get back to work. Everyone is happy now except the store owner, because her lunch break was ruined. The main part of my task is done now, but it takes me about another 15 minutes to clean up my mess and reorganize my truck to get ready for my next stop, which will be about a 1-hour drive from my current location. As I'm doing this, I see the retail district manager, I've met her before, going into the store. She walks back out of the store with the former store manager who is carrying a box of her personal items. People need to learn that if the company's sending somebody in and they trust them to work with your servers in your store, that person is much further up the food chain than you are, and at the very least, they are much less replaceable than you are. This next story comes to us from Remarkable Youth 504. Do not want me to work my notice? Okay, I will not work during my notice. Let's jump right in. This happened almost 5 years ago. Some details are intentionally vague. This will be a long read, but I promise it will be worth it at the end. I was working in an organization that was super toxic, so much so that we were a revolving door. Most employees stayed only a few months. To counter this, our management put 3 months' notice into everyone's contract, including existing employees. It's not strictly illegal where this happened, but very unusual. I believe the idea was to make it harder for employees to find a job outside, as employers didn't usually want to wait for 3 months. However, this didn't work as people simply quit and waited for a month or two before starting their job hunt. I was there almost 4 years. I needed the money, so I put up with whatever abusive crap was thrown at me. My boss was a guy we'll call Vince, not actual name. Now, Vince was not particularly good, but he sometimes respected the fact that I was the most tenured grunt in the organization. Enter Rajesh, not actual name. Rajesh was brought in from outside for strategically improving our division. This was quite strange given our division generated the most profits. Within months, Rajesh had made the environment even more toxic. He pulled Vince's team under him and got Vince fired, and he actively encouraged us grunts to spy on each other. Rajesh also had it out for me from day one. Till date, I don't know why. He started making my life more harder than others. This culminated in him taking me aside and telling me that I was not pulling my weight. Now, at this point, I was doing quite well in the organization, plus I was doing a lot of additional work, since only I knew certain systems and processes. See high attrition above. So I was quite angry. I started looking out. I still wasn't brave enough to quit and start looking. Fortunately, I was able to find a job that was willing to wait the 3 months. So it was my turn to take Rajesh aside and tell him I quit. Boy, Rajesh was pissed. He went from denial, you can't quit, to negotiation. What if I give you a raise at the year end? To acceptance. Thus, I was serving my notice and working away like an honest bee. My usual work plus the additional work. At this point, I was called by HR and told that Rajesh wanted me gone. The insane part was that they wanted me to pay the company for the 2.5 months shortfall in notice. I obviously refused. then went back and checked the contract. Turns out a notice of less than 3 months could only happen through mutual consent, and the initiating party, company if they wanted me gone sooner, or me if I wanted to leave earlier, had to compensate the other party for the shortfall. Cue malicious compliance. The next day, I stopped doing anything at all. I logged in and logged out my hours and did jack crap. Not my work, definitely not the additional responsibilities. Soon, there was a complete meltdown all around. Rajesh would pull me into meetings and scream and try to bully me, and I would say nothing but smirk. Then, they tried to have someone else learn from me so that they could do what I did. Remember I said earlier how I was the only one who knew some of the old systems and processes? Well, now I claimed I didn't really remember any of them. So obviously, there could be no handover. Soon, my workplace turned into a dumpster fire. The HR and Rajesh smartened up and offered to buy out my notice if I cooperated and helped transition my work. I refused. Then, to twist the knife further, I started having meetings with fellow grunts. Remember, everyone was always a newbie, and encouraging them to leave as well. HR tried to get me to leave twice more, but I ended up serving the full 3 months. Remember the mutual consent part? Now, OP added an edit on at the end of the story. It says, "For all the folks in the comments saying I'd have been terminated for not doing my work, a large part of what I was doing by then was above and beyond, and they couldn't terminate me for not doing something that wasn't part of my roles and responsibilities or mentioned in a contract. I did do some of the work I was supposed to do, I just either took a long time or did it poorly, requiring a lot of rework. That and the fact that what I did was a black box to the leadership. No one knew or understood the technical details, meaning that they couldn't build a strong enough case for instant termination." This is an interesting concept to me because for the companies that I've worked in, and maybe it's just because of the security level at these companies, if you gave your notice, they'd pretty much walk you out of the building right after you gave it. I guess they figured paying you out to leave early was better than having you stay there for 2 weeks when you could absolutely sabotage things in that time. This next story comes to us from Moonlover10792. You want a man to help you? No problem. One will clock in soon. Let's jump right in. This happened 16 years ago. When I was about 20 years old, I was a department manager in a big box hardware store. People said I acted 25, but I didn't even look 18. As a young female, I saw my fair amount of discrimination, but the worst always came from women. This is the story of one such woman. I managed the paint department. I had 3 associates who worked for me. They loved me as a boss because I bought them department radio, took the shifts they didn't want, worked Friday close and Saturday mid so my 2 younger guys could have time to have fun on Friday nights, and the other gentlemen took early Saturday mornings so they could sleep off their fun. In trade, I gave the older gentleman his ideal schedule. My team was awesome. One day, I was in the department alone and a lady came up and asked me where she could find the 5-gallon oil-based primer. I let her know that my location didn't carry the 5-gallon size of that primer. She told me that we did and said that it was shelved right there while suggesting I was too stupid to remember. Her husband gave me an apologetic look. I let her know that another location had what she was looking for and that it was in fact in that exact location in that store. She let me know how stupid she thought I was for thinking she could mix up stores. Then she began yelling and loudly insisting that I get a man out there to help her because she wanted someone competent and not a stupid little girl. Her husband actually tried to step in at that point, but I just smiled and let her know that a male paint associate would be clocking in any minute, and that I would be happy to direct him to her as soon as he is on the clock. I smiled and waited for Joe to clock in. Joe was great and I knew he could handle this or I wouldn't have put him in that situation. But Joe was also new. He was learning things super quick, but still relied on the rest of us for help. When I saw Joe walking up, I quickly said that there was a customer who needed help. I let him know that she was super upset and asked him to do his best to answer her questions. Joe walked up to the lady. She said, "Finally, a man." She asked her question, explained where the product should be, and waited. Joe calmly let her know that he had never seen us carry 5-gallon size of oil-based primer, but said he could check with the paint department manager. She was happy and loudly said she was happy to be getting some real help. Joe walked up to me and started to ask me about 5-gallon oil-based primers. The lady quickly walked up and asked him what he was doing. He turned and said, "This is my manager, she runs the department." The husband laughed out loud, the woman stormed off, and I bought Joe lunch. I honestly think that if you go into a place that is predominantly staffed by men and you find a woman working in there, they are the one that you want to go to for help, because you know that they know their way around everything and they don't take any crap from the men. This next story comes to us from Disastrous Glove 4889. Not allowed to use my initiative? Work is cancelled then. Let's jump right in. This happened a few years back, but I got reminded of the guy involved again recently, and it all came flooding back. I had been given a new project at work, which was to install a new type of LED bulb in train signals in place of the old halogen ones. The guy I was doing the project with, we will call P, short for prick. This guy was universally hated. I had never heard of him before, but I asked what he was like, and the first words out of the mouths of anybody who had any dealings with him were, "He's a prick," or other more C-based words. Honestly, I've never known somebody to not have one person like them at any level of the company. Also, he had no actual authority over me. It was his project, and I was the person actually performing or supervising the work, but anything I did under his say-so was done with mere courtesy. If anything, I was actually a grade above him job-wise. However, my boss told me to play nice because I was new to the supervisor role. I got given a spreadsheet of all the signals that needed the bulbs changed and worked out the staff, the materials, and the best course of action to do the work. It was a crap job. You had to change brackets, lamp holders, wiring in nuts and bolts with tools that weren't fit for purpose, usually in the wind or rain, and up a 20-foot ladder around live electrical equipment. You could isolate some circuits, but usually not all of them in a signal head. Also, I was consistently the last person at work, including my boss's bosses, dealing with all this crap for no extra thanks, and no chance of extra pay either, salaried worker. After doing the job for a while, I got an email from P saying he had planned which signals to change for each shift from now on, and I was not allowed to stray from the plan. The plan was effing dumb. Instead of doing signals in a straight line, it was 2 in this area, 2 at this area 5 miles away, 3 here, just terribly put together. I told him this was stupid as hell and we needed to do them all in a line, and for maybe the first time in his life, he saw sense and relented. He then made a new plan with them all in a row, which he said I had to follow. What he failed to realize because he was incompetent was the railway has engineering works in specified areas where other works cannot take place in them for safety reasons. The very next shift, what he has listed us to do cannot be done. We cannot access the area. If we did, we would very much get fired. So I looked at the spreadsheet, found an area we could work, and worked there. This infuriated P, and I was told via email to follow his plan to the letter and stop being so arrogant. Completing a night's work instead of literally doing nothing was arrogant? Okay, fine. Malicious compliance activated. The next couple of nights went okay, but then another specified area showed up we couldn't work in. This time, we just didn't do the work, and I reported back as such because we can't deviate from the plan. This happened multiple times a week. Radio silence from P. At some point, P's boss comes out with us to see our work because she hasn't seen this type of work before, and we get along great, honestly. This was planned in advance. She wasn't keeping an eye on us because we had started to underperform. We get about half of the work done, and then start packing up to leave. She asks why. I tell her because the next signals are in an area for planned engineering works, and we can't go in there. She's okay with that, as I said if we went in there we would probably be out of a job, or we could be killed. Trains moving, high voltage equipment left on, etc. But she then asks why we can't go to another location and work there. I show her the plan and tell her how we are supposed to adhere to it at all costs. She asks why, and I ask her if she's seen P's email. She had not, but said she would chase it up during the day. I get a very prickly email from P during the day asking why I only completed half the work, and he had even checked to see what time I'd been on track till to tell me I still had 2 hours I could have worked. He CC'd his boss and my boss into the email. He thought he had me because he was correct. There was 2 hours left before we had to get off track in the section we completed the work. But the cancelled engineering hours in the area for all the other assets made the rest of the work impossible. I was slightly taken aback by this though, because while there is a way to check what time people get off track, nobody ever uses it because it is such an underhanded thing to do and creates massive distrust with everybody. He is the only person in nearly 20 years at this company I've known to have done it. His manager then calls us all into a meeting. Before anybody else could speak, she told P the reason half the work was done was because the equipment further along on his plan was in a specified area we are not permitted to work in, regardless of what his stupid hindrance of a plan says. She said he should have looked at what areas we could work at before a shift instead of spending that time spying on the staff for what time they get off track. Her numbers had me working at 40% above what was expected for the shift when I was in charge, and less than half of what I should be doing when he was making us follow his plan. P tries to talk back, but she says, and I quote, "Shut your stupid mouth before you say anything else useless." I love this woman. I then get sent out while she talks to P and my boss in private. The fallout was the project getting taken off of P, him being moved on from that role to never have a position with any kind of authority again. She gave my staff and I a much better project to work on with more overtime, voluntary, a better person to liaise with, and the mental image of P looking like a scolded puppy. Ah yes, our nearly daily reminder to get any instructions from our higher-ups in writing, whether that's on paper or by email or text, or something that you can just look back at and go, yeah, you told me to do this, this one's on you. This next story comes to us from FredSam25. My community college credits don't count? Okay, sign me up for all your classes, professor. Let's jump right in. I went to a pretty bad high school. They had very few AP classes, so my parents signed me up for local community college classes for physics that I attended after school. Fast forward to my first year at university, and I go to apply my community college physics credits to get out of taking redundant classes. University requires me to take Physics 4A, 4B, and 4C, each being a prerequisite for the next. It was like classical physics, electromagnetism, and thermodynamics and waves, or something like that. Since I had taken all three in community college, I'd be a year and a half ahead. The first problem I ran into was the registrar's office wouldn't automatically apply the community college credits to cancel out the required credits for graduation. I had to get the professor that taught the course to sign off on it, and for that semester, the same professor taught all three classes. I meet with the professor, and he refuses to sign the forms. Community college is a joke, especially yours. You need to take 4A, 4B, and 4C here if you want to graduate from this university. Feeling defeated, I went to register for 4A, but then I noticed something. While the online system wouldn't apply my community college credits to eliminate the required physical credits, it did apply the community college courses for the required prerequisites. So I could register for 4A, 4B, and 4C all in the same semester, with the same professor. In fact, because it was the same professor, none of the course times conflicted. He arranged all three to be in the same classroom back to back. No need to run around campus either. First day of class, I sit front row for 4A. Don't know if the professor noticed me then, but once class ended and everyone else got up, I stayed in my seat, waiting for the next one to start in 10 minutes. He glanced at me funny as he went through 4B. When that ended and I didn't get up, he approached me. "I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to leave. I have another class soon." "No worries, I know, 4C. I'm enrolled in that too." "You can't be enrolled in all of them. They have prerequisites." He checks his enrollment sheet, and sure enough, I'm enrolled in all three. He tries to convince me that I'll fail if I stay, but I tell him not to worry. I'm not gonna lie. It was tough sitting through 3 hours of classes, 3 hours of midterms, and 6 hours of finals. But I had already taken all of these courses. In the end, I got A, B+, and A-. But best of all, I got to knock that jerk down a notch. So at the end of this one, OP should log in to rate my professor and leave a review saying something like, "I didn't learn anything from this guy. The guy who taught these at my community college was so much better." Another thing that made me wonder on this one is why OP didn't just go talk to the department head, because it seems to me like a professor shouldn't be the only person who can veto someone's transfer credits that had to come from higher up. This next story comes to us from Someone You Don't Know 70. Won't compensate me for my fence? Then compensate me 100 times as much for my crops. Let's jump right in. The malicious compliance in this story is not mine, it's my brother-in-law's. Some of the details may be slightly off, but the overall story is true. My brother-in-law grows avocados in California. Several years ago, a portion of his ranch was ravaged by a wildfire, or so he thought at first. When the smoke cleared, it became obvious that the fire was caused by an electrical line that was blown over by strong winds and had landed on his fence, catching it on fire. Since he had been planning on diversifying his crops anyway, he decided he'd simply replace his fence, replant, and move on. To that end, he called up the electric company that owned the downed line and asked them for about $10,000 in compensation to replace the fence that had been destroyed by their electrical line. They denied any and all culpability in the matter and told him that he should sue them if he didn't like it. What the electric company didn't realize was that my sister, his wife, works full-time as a corporate attorney for one of the largest utilities in California, defending against cases just like this one. At first, she was concerned that this utility was a subsidiary of her employer, in which case there would be a massive conflict of interest. Apparently, legal departments frown on their employees when their husband is suing them. Go figure. Thankfully, after some investigation, she realized that the utility in question was completely independent of her employer. And at that point, the gloves were off. My sister didn't represent her husband because she's typically on the other side of these cases, but she did advise him on everything he needed to bring to court to win his case. And she helped him find a very reputable lawyer with a solid record of winning cases like these. Not knowing what they were up against, the utility persisted in refusing to negotiate, hoping that by forcing my brother-in-law to trial, he would simply give up and go away. Spurred on by my sister's insistence that he had a solid case, he called their bluff and went to trial. As it turns out, California takes agricultural damage very seriously, and the court conducted its own independent investigation. It estimated the total damages at around $335,000, which is over 33 times as much as my brother-in-law had asked for initially. Furthermore, there is a law in California that awards triple damages in cases where agriculture is impacted. So, the utility that had been unwilling to negotiate over $10,000 was now on the hook for over $1 million in damages. When all was said and done, my brother-in-law confided to me that he would have gladly settled for the $10,000 in arbitration, and that it probably would have taken him over a decade to even sell $1 million worth of crops. The utility had to have their day in court though. Wait a minute, so that's what they mean when they say you can save a lot of money if you stop toasting avocados? This next story comes to us from LA King Donalt 24. You want me to shut up and follow your directions? Okie dokie. Let's jump right in. New to Reddit and just discovered this sub. Reading your fabulous malicious compliances jogged my memory. This happened around the early 2000s when I was working for my uncle's fencing company. So customer A, butthole, purchased a newly constructed home, cookie cutter, everything builder grade. The land plots were divided only by fluorescent orange marking spray paint, hardly official. My uncle submitted a bid per customer A's request and we got the project. We had the lowest bid, around $1,200 lower than the competition. The caveat? We collect full payment up front. Not a deal breaker for customers as we accept credit card payments. This way, both parties are protected from fraud. During that time, my uncle had just left his previous job as a land surveyor. His specialty? Property line surveying. The estimated property line, marked by the above-mentioned orange spray paint, was nearly 2 feet off on one side of customer A's property. My uncle makes the necessary adjustments and markings, and we start digging the post holes. Customer A makes a surprise job site visit inspection. He sees our post holes and turns beet red. He rushes towards us and starts dropping F-bombs left and right. "What the F are you idiots doing? You're giving away part of my property to my effing neighbor. Can't you effers effing see the bright orange marking on the effing dirt? I want you geniuses to fill up these holes ASAP and dig right where the orange lines are. I want my fence directly on top of the orange lines." I just about lost it and was about to get in customer A's face. My uncle stops me and he tries to explain, "The orange lines are off. I'm the one paying here, not you, so you follow my effing directions. Please, let me explain. No, I have paid you in full. You're not paid to explain. You're paid to build my fence exactly the way I want it, where I want it. This effing conversation is over." He drives off and my uncle looks at me with a malicious smile. "OP, let's grab an early lunch, and then we'll give him what he wants." I shrug. Over lunch, he calls my aunt, his secretary, to have her draft a new JOC work order contract. In it, it's explicitly and officially noted that the fence will be erected 22 inches east of the official property line, and that the customer will shoulder full responsibility and liability should a conflict arise either with their future new neighbor, the home next door was still unsold at that point, or any other party. Aunt emails the contract to customer A, my uncle and I have our 2-martini lunch hour. Aunt calls and says customer A has signed and emailed the new contract back to her. And now that we have a paper trail, we go back to the site and continue working. That same afternoon, customer A pays us another visit and says, "Just checking to see if you decided to follow my instructions. You idiots didn't wait for me to sign the new contract before resuming work, did you?" We sure did. As he turned around to leave, I can hear him mouth something of, "Effing idiots." Upon completion, 3 days later, he signs off that the work was satisfactory. He was still in butthole mode, refusing to acknowledge either my uncle or I when we thanked him for his business. 4 months later, he contacts my uncle again, requesting for him to bid on a new project. Yep, you guessed it, to move the existing fence on top of the official property line. We gave him an unreasonably high bid and still secured the project. This time around, he was a teddy bear throughout the entire project. This one kinda makes you wonder if OP might have made a little bit of an, anonymous tip when a neighbor finally purchased the property next door. It would have been a way to ensure that customer A actually had to pay their idiot tax. This next story comes to us from Ancient Educator 76. "Ma'am, you can't just not pay your medical bills, you need to pay." Cue capital letters M and C. Let's jump right in. This was told to me 43 minutes ago by a colleague I respect, admire, and regret that this is one of our last lunches together. Her stories, her life is more entertaining than any show on any streaming device. Totally binge-worthy. Finally, she throws one up there that not only fits this sub, but she let me use as well, saying, "Go to town." Well, let me get my man about town clothes on. I had a shooting headache, worst I ever had. I didn't want to go to the ER, but I had to. This was the worst feeling of my life. My blood pressure was 260 over something, I don't know. I get into the room and the nurse was pretty good, but it took a while to get the doctor in. Butthole Doc finally shows up, and I am trying to describe my feeling, my headache, the feeling of a weight on my chest, super heavy. He thought I was faking it. I wasn't. He tried to give me morphine, and I told him I'm allergic. I am. He thought even more so that I was faking it to get pills. I don't even know how rejecting morphine gets me pain pills, but okay. He was a total butthole every step of the way. He didn't listen to me when I talked, and every time he came into the room, my numbers kept spiking again. The people there said to my husband, "You've got to calm your wife down," like that's his effing job or something. every time the doctor came in, my EKG went up. We wound up barring him from the room. Seriously, OP, I'd rather have had a chimpanzee, anybody in here instead of that guy. Anyway, they finally get the guy out of there and a new doc in, which took a while, but I'm glad they did. When this doctor mentioned the other doctor, my numbers spiked again. Blood pressure up. I found out I was having a panic attack and just didn't know it. So anyway, I get treated, head home, and about a month later, I get the bills from the ER. And of course, butthole doc. I pay all of the other bills I receive, but I'm thinking of not paying this one, because he didn't treat me, just tried. My husband and I discussed it back and forth for a couple weeks, and in the meantime, I keep getting calls from his doctor's office. Ma'am, I understand that you saw a different doctor there, but he did treat you, he consulted with you, he attempted to diagnose but you refused, and more garbage that rang true, but still tasted, well, like garbage. I didn't tell her I wasn't intending to pay. I just told the truth that I didn't have the money right now. She keeps calling every single effing day. Each time I pretend I'm not frustrated by the calls and repeat the same spiel about not having the money. She got frustrated by my repetition, probably, and said, "Ma'am, you can't just not pay your medical bills. You need to pay." Oh yeah? Enter malicious compliance. I decided this was going to be a whole thing. I decided I was going to take a nice picture of me and my whole family flipping off the camera and order those as my actual checks from my second bank account. Yes, she showed me the checks. Yes, it's as glorious as you could imagine. No, I don't have permission to post even part of the check. This took longer than I expected to get, but when I finally got them, I decided it was time to pay right before collections. I wrote them a check for $1 and sent it in. They call one day soon thereafter and ask if there's any way I can pay more than $1. I tell them that, yet again, I don't have the money to pay more than that. They just hung up. The next month and following 13 months, I wrote a check to that butthole doc for $1. They took payment, it never went to collections, and I'm currently considering whether to increase the pay to $10 monthly until the bill is paid or even pay it off. I don't think I want this guy's name in my mailbox anymore, but then again, I want to make good use out of the $12 I spent getting these checks made. Paying $1 monthly would take up all the checks I ordered. I mean, who else could I write these checks to? OP, keep in mind that it on average costs around 12 cents for them to cash that old-fashioned check, so I'd start making them out for like 10 cents, just so that when they cash one, they're in the red. Also, I'd check your bill collector laws in your area because if they're calling you every single day, that can be considered harassment and there is something you can do about it. This next story comes to us from His Royal Majesty King 5. Well, I did give them 2 weeks notice. Let's jump right in. So, about a dozen years ago, I was in a great paying job, but the work environment was absolutely atrocious. I spent the entire year I was there looking for another job. Finally got an offer elsewhere at a hefty pay cut, but leapt at it. Now, this place, a very small company, said they were looking for a mid-level software developer. They realized I was a senior developer, but the manager said, "I'm not really sure what to offer as we've never hired a senior developer before." That explanation sounds a little funny, but ultimately, it turned out as such. They'd start me out at X dollars a year, a mid-level developer salary, and at my 1-year review, they'd give me a raise of somewhere between Y and Z, depending on how things went, where Z equals 2 times Y. And it would have amounted to somewhere between a 6 to 12% raise. It's just a salary with benefits, no bonuses, but I was fine with that. A little weird that they try to start new employees with only 1 week of vacation time instead of 2, the way every other place I'd worked does, but they offered me the 2 up front. So I did some work on a legacy product, but they mostly had me working on some completely new feature that integrated with the existing product. A year goes by and I like the place. It's small, but the team is good, and they had me move them to using Eclipse. They were using a text editor, albeit a text editor that had a very convenient compile this source file now feature. Most of the team loved it, and the assistant manager was so delighted with the IDE that she stated, "I'll give it up when they pry it from my cold, dead fingers." So I do a little work on the legacy project, I do a lot of work on the new project, and I work on some customer conversions, converting their data to work with our software when they were on different software before. I also did refactoring, trying to, actually make use of parent and child classes properly, rather than relying on the massive amount of copy-paste and code duplication that existed there. Me and one of the other guys, call him Z, who was my mentor to the company, but I was his mentor in furthering his programming style, tried to convince the manager to let us set up a source control system. The current system was that everyone worked off a single copy of the source code on a shared network drive, which was backed up to tape every night. The manager resisted. We even suggested he let us take one of the old junk PCs from the storage room and set up a very small repository just to experiment with and make sure it worked as we planned. Hello world and programs and files of that small scale before trying to move their stuff to it. Manager wouldn't budge. My review is late, several months late, but we were busy, and the manager said it was the most busy year he recalls them having. Also, I'd scheduled my 2 weeks of vacation so that I could fly out to visit my parents. During this time, I'd gotten calls about other jobs, but I mostly blew them off. I knew for a fact where my salary would be when I got my review, and I was happy with that. Still, the calls came here and there. My review finally comes and is almost glowing. One or two minor hiccups, but overall, they were very pleased with me. My raise? $0. Well, I can't really present a raise to the owner since you haven't mastered any pieces of the legacy software. I mean, I had you working on the new stuff, but there was always time for learning on the legacy system. There was always time during their busiest year ever. So busy that my review was 5 months late. I grumbled. The two guys I worked with the most were jaw-dropping shocked when I told them. Although one of the older guys there did sort of say words to the effect of, "I can't say that's the first time that's happened here." I dug up the old email from before I was hired and forwarded it to him. He took several days to respond. He never takes that long to respond. He came up with some cockamamie word games about how things didn't go that well this year, trying to play the, "Oh, I meant going well overall, not going well with your performance." So I kept working anyway, but I followed up on the most recent call about a potential job. It was the same pay I was making at this place, but with bonuses and better benefits. And half the distance and time to drive, none of the tolls. I snuck out to interview at the new place, seemed to go well, and we struck a deal. I gave them a start date of after my vacation. Went back to my current job and played along for a little bit. They also went to job fairs, looking to hire someone straight out of college. Also, now the manager was interested in source control. One of the other developers said, "Well, last year it was your idea, but this year it's his idea." Interestingly, I briefly met one graduating student that they eventually hired. So it comes up to the point where my vacation is about to start. I go down to the CTO's office and give my 2 weeks notice the day before my leave. He seemed a little thrown by that and commented something about how they usually expect to have the 2 weeks to transition. I said I agreed with him, but I pointed out that my manager made certain promises, my review was glowing, and my raise somehow was 0. He didn't quite address that, but made a cryptic sort of comment, "X doesn't really share very well." I never knew if that meant my manager doesn't let the rest of them know what he did, or meant that he somehow benefits from keeping the costs down. I later was given to understand that the CTO and the owner might well have known or been in on the plan to stiff me on the raise. I did have to talk with my manager, of course, and he did say, "Well, I guess I'm the bad guy on this," though he didn't seem particularly remorseful. There was a shocking moment of candor, but we did get what we needed from you. I suspect that the manager's raise was based on how well he did cost control though. I mean, I was driving an older vehicle, and the manager was driving a newish Acura SUV. But giving my 2 weeks notice on the day before my vacation was my malicious compliance that I took with great relish. Epilogue. Years later, I'm working at another company about 2 miles from that place. A colleague of mine actually told me he was going to interview at the place with the dickbag manager. He also told me who was interviewing him, Z. Z was a good guy, and one of the two that was shocked at my lack of raise. I told my buddy, yeah, Z is a good guy, but ask him if X is going to be your manager, because if so, you're not interested. Z actually told my colleague, yeah, OP was great, and while I was his mentor at the company here, I felt more like he was a mentor to me. X did screw him, but don't worry, X isn't part of the picture for this job. Also, that new person we hired, she says she can always tell when she runs into OP's code. The code style is so much better. My colleague ultimately didn't take the job with them though. I think one thing to learn from this story is that if you're taking a new job and you've negotiated a raise or a benefit or promotions or something, make sure that what you negotiated is actually written into your employment contract. That way, they have to follow it. And if they don't, you can take them to court and they'll definitely have to follow it, or even pay damages afterwards. This next story comes to us from Broken Brainiac. If we have to throw food away, I'll take the trash out, just not to the dumpster. Let's jump right in. Just found this subreddit, thought this story fit. In high school, I worked at a fast food restaurant, not saying which one or where. Sadly, like many fast food places, we had a lot of waste. However, we had one employee, who we'll call Phil, not his real name, that would take as much waste food as he could carry at the end of the day and ride his bike to a place that a lot of homeless people would hang out and give it to them. Other employees with cars would often take more if he couldn't carry all of it. There was nothing wrong with the food, it was just called waste because it was cooked and not sold. At one point, someone high up in the corporate part of the restaurant decided to try and cut costs by minimizing waste. Their strategy was to require us to throw away all unsold food at the end of the day, with the idea being that employees wouldn't cook extra food to take home, so we would waste less. Now, the general manager at this restaurant was very by the book and never deviated from any official rule. The new food waste rules were no exception. She would stand there at the end of the day and watch as the employees put all of the extra food into the trash can. Phil, determined to continue his nightly food donations, found a loophole. Every night, right before we closed and threw away food, Phil would take the trash out, then put a clean trash bag in the can. We had warming trays, but toward the end of the day, we replaced them with to-go boxes so we could clean the trays. So the result was a trash bag of sorted and boxed food, which was even easier for Phil to transport and allowed him to carry more, and the people he took the food to were more happy with the change. To get it out of the restaurant, Phil would volunteer to take out the trash every night, then just take the bag with him when he left rather than put it in the dumpster. This worked pretty well for a while. One night, the general manager saw Phil leaving with the bag on the security cameras. Like I said, she was a stickler for the rules, so she didn't approve of it. The next day, she called a staff meeting and told all of us, though we all knew it was directed mostly at Phil, that the waste food trash had to go in the dumpster and that nobody was allowed to take it, that kind of thing. Phil did not care. He continued his routine, albeit with a little more sneaking, until the manager saw him doing it again. The fallout? Phil was fired for stealing company property or something like that. I don't remember exactly how the general manager phrased it. Several other employees, myself included, quit shortly after and found other places to go, leaving the restaurant struggling with fewer employees than it needed. And no one experienced enough to train new employees, since the general manager didn't do much as far as food, and the employees that quit were mostly the experienced ones. The restaurant recovered and is doing well enough, and I don't think the waste food policies were changed. I don't know where or how Phil is today, but I hope he's doing well. Phil, if you read this and recognize yourself in this story, love you, brother. Keep being a good person. So what Phil should have done in this case was gone out and placed the bag into the dumpster. Then 5-10 minutes after shift, taken it out of the dumpster and put it into their car. Because once an item is trash, in a lot of jurisdictions, it's no longer protected and anyone can take it. That means when your trash cans are out on the curb, anyone can go through it and take anything they want. Police can search it without a warrant, all that. Then he'd be within his legal right to take the food and do whatever with it, since it's now trash in every definition. This next story comes to us from Hoggenly. If you say I'm fit for my job, then I guess I'll do it. Let's jump right in. This happened to my mom about 10 years ago. My mother was a legal secretary and worked for one of the biggest law firms in my country for over 15 years. At the point of this story, she was about 2 years from retirement. She had noticed a deterioration in her eyesight and was struggling to work on the computer, read, or do most of her day-to-day work. The firm sent her to an affiliated doctor who said she was absolutely fine and can continue working. But as she was struggling, she decided to pay privately for a specialist, who immediately told her that she was no longer fit to drive safely, let alone accurately read or use a computer, as she had multiple degenerative eye conditions. The specialist told her to minimize time on a computer to an absolute minimum, as it was triggering migraines and other problems. She brought this report to the firm and requested either a change in her job requirements or to go on leave until she was fit to work again. But of course, the firm had their own report. They said she was exaggerating and could absolutely keep working. But they very kindly told her that she only had to work on the computer 4 days a week from now on. 1 day a week, she could just do filing. How generous. So she kept doing her job, but wouldn't you know it, when she was binding files for court, they were just a mess. Filing? Wow, can't find anything. I know that she disliked several of the lawyers. My mother grew up poor and had to leave school young to work, so being uneducated, she wasn't always treated with much respect. So she was happy enough to deal with their anger, but she was very friendly with most, including one particular lawyer who may or may not have mentioned some tips to my mother on how to deal with the problem, and what she was entitled to after working there for so many years. When the higher-ups inevitably called my mother in about the terrible work, she presented quite a compelling case on her rights, safety in the workplace, disability leave, etc. Long story short, she got fully paid medical leave until she retired, back paid for any time she took off for doctors and hospital visits. Well, I'm glad that OP didn't just take the first doctor's report with blind acceptance. You see what I did there? OP's mom didn't. Okay, I'm sorry if my humor is a little short-sighted. I just like to think that I have a good eye for things that'll make you all laugh. This next story comes to us from Sabrina Spellman 1. Solicitor embarrassed me and made me cry 3 times, so I became super efficient at my job. Let's jump right in. A quick warning to everybody listening to this story, it deals with domestic violence. If that's a sensitive topic for you, you can skip to the next story now. This happened many years ago. I've only just found this sub, and while my story is nowhere near as witty as the ones I'm reading, it still makes me chuckle. When I was around 19, I was working as a receptionist, front of house at a solicitor's office. It was quite small but very successful. 4 partners, main one was the lady it was named after, who was kind of fierce in a Judge Judy kind of way, so I'll call her Judy. A new solicitor we will call Anna joined the team. We had a conveyancing, a personal injury, financial, and criminal department solicitor, and she would be working family law, and her specialty and main focus would be helping domestic violence victims. At this time, all of the abused clients were women. She was awesome at her job. I saw so many victims of abuse while they waited in reception, and because they were so stressed and worried, they would sometimes just tell me their life stories while they waited. I did my best to comfort them. Sometimes they'd have to wait an hour or longer if something else was happening. Anna advocated hard for these women: restraining orders, emergency hearings, police interviews, protection, arranging safe houses, custody of children. I really admired her and still do now. Those women needed her. The thing about Anna was she was extremely posh, well-educated, she spoke better than the characters on Downton Abbey or even the Queen. But she was also very opinionated, and she swore a lot. Hearing her talk about one of the husbands of a battered woman, what an absolute twatting little C, in a voice that sounds similar to the Queen, made us giggle, but she reined it in and was mostly professional in front of clients. Most of my job was filing, typing voice dictation statements, and logging calls from the women with restraining orders who had been contacted by their ex-partner or abuser. So I'd get a lot of calls. Hi Sabrina, he called me at 8:15 a.m. and 10 a.m. today, also an email at 9 p.m. through his mother's account, things like that. It all had to be logged and reported for the court files. I got so many of these calls, I'd recognize each by voice. This is important later. After she'd been there for maybe a month, she was featured in an article that put the office in a very good light. The article highlighted her important work in keeping these people safe. We celebrated with her, but it went to her head and she became arrogant and snappy, with little put-downs here to the secretaries and other workers. She became pretty full of herself, getting snarky and barking out coffee to me as soon as she walked inside. I let it go. She was stressed and doing something important. As it was so long ago, most documents had to be faxed. Her office was 2 doors away from reception. She would let me know if she was expecting something important, and I would drop everything to rush the documents to her. Waiting for legal stuff, police reports, or restraining orders could quite literally be a life and death situation for the clients. Sure enough, a restraining order document came through for a female client who was sitting with Anna in her office. She was crying, looked like she had no sleep. Her story was horrendous. I had to type up some statements of hers. I felt desperately sorry for her. The rule was, if something important came through, I had to rush and interrupt any client meeting. The papers came through, I rushed to the office and handed them to Anna and left. Moments later, Anna was in reception, screeching at me because the timestamp said it was delivered a whole hour earlier. I was confused. I'd given it to her the moment it came through. She would not stop yelling that I had put this woman's life in jeopardy over my laziness and stupidity, and I should be fired. She made so much noise that Judy came out of her office to listen, the founder of the company. Her face gave absolutely nothing away, and afterwards, she quietly just said, "Please make sure to give the documents quickly in the future to avoid any more problems." It happened again. An 8 or so page document came through for that same client who was in there with her. I rushed to her office, handed them to her, and went to leave. Before I could, Anna started yelling at me again. "This was an hour ago. What the F, Sabrina? What the F did I tell you?" This time she started swearing and I couldn't get a word in, and all of this in front of the poor client who looked wildly uncomfortable. Judy came to the door again and again. Her face gave nothing away and just asked me to come with her. She asked if there was a problem. I explained and she thanked me. Anna then followed us out and started yelling at me that I had no respect or kindness in my heart for these women, and I was lazy, utterly incompetent, and ridiculously not right in the head. I cried in the toilets. Over the next few days, the same client came in. Things had escalated further and had hit the newspapers. It was an awful case. So the 4 partners along with Anna were meeting with her in the same office. I went back in to give a file to one of the other partners there, and Anna piped up, "Was this from an hour ago too? There seems to be a pattern here." Again, in front of the client and her 4 bosses. It didn't bother me this time though. I had one of those moments in bed the night before, the moment when your eyes snap open while you're trying to sleep, and you have that bingo realization moment. So I calmly just said, the reason why the documents appeared to be an hour late was because the clocks have changed for daylight savings times. I should have realized that when the ink was still not dry as I handed them to you. Sure enough, the document on her desk yesterday was a little smudged. The fax machine was old and didn't update the time. My little victory moment was spoiled because as I was leaving the office, I tripped over my own foot and knocked my head on the door frame, giving Anna a good laugh. The next day, a staff meeting was called about professionalism in the office. The client who witnessed Anna's meltdown had approached Judy. She was really upset to see Anna treat the staff that way, and her swearing had frightened her. Judy was very clear that this was not acceptable. The woman had heard enough yelling and swearing for a lifetime. Anna begrudgingly apologized to me, and I shrugged it off. Judy also apologized privately for not stepping in when she should have. No problem. My malicious compliance was next. Every single call I had to log, instead of the main list I used on the computer, from the women, I wrote on an individual post-it. So I'd be in and out of her office sometimes 10 times in an hour. Her desk was flooded with post-its that just said, 10 a.m., call from husband to client X. She was annoyed, but this was what she asked for. I wasted a lot of post-its. The next bit got a little strange. A lady who was in a shelter safe house with her daughter called and said she was reconciling with her husband and she wants to drop the case completely and did not want to be contacted again. This happens. Sometimes victims go back when it gets too much. This was a particularly brutal case. I told Anna straight away, who said she would call her in a few days. Calling right then might jeopardize her safety if he was there. And I said no, call the police. She asked why, and I said it wasn't her on the phone. I recognize her voice every time she calls. It wasn't her. We called for a welfare check, and sure enough, her husband had taken her back home and had his older daughter call the office pretending to be her. He was arrested. When it all worked out well and the lady was again in a much better safe house, Anna gifted me a bottle of wine and a thank you card, and then asked me to stop with the post-its and that the message was received. She also apologized again properly. Sorry for the long post. Moral of the story is, don't treat people like crap even if your intentions are pure and trying to help someone. We can all be kind. It's really hard to keep ourselves professional when one of our superiors is trying to curse us out. In this case, Anna ended up a little embarrassed, and that's probably the best way it could go. When we keep our cool and come back with just the facts, our supervisors might have to eat their own hat. This next story comes to us from PanCubano159, leveraging my job description to put an end user in his place. Let's jump right in. Posted this in a thread on r/sysadmin, and I decided to share it here as well. I also posted this to r/tales from tech support, but it was removed. I used to manage a Cadillac dealership's network a couple of years ago. There was a car salesman who also liked to study computers in his spare time. Unfortunately, that also meant that he knew way too much to be absolutely dangerous. I would constantly get complaints about him bunking down on a specific floating desk on the floor and locking it out from anyone to use it but him. I reached out to management about it, but they didn't want to do anything about it. Even though he was bypassing many security features like local admin, used a boot environment to give himself local admin, web filtering, unapproved apps, remoting, etc., all via a USB with a bunch of portable apps. Management said, "Why are you coming to us about an IT problem? This isn't a management problem when it involves computers. Isn't that your job? I'm pretty sure that's in your job description." You get the idea. But I was sick and tired of getting calls and messages daily about this one guy. So I decided that if management wasn't going to have my back on this issue, then I guess I have free reign to handle it how I please, right? Since I was dealing with an above average user, I decided to go to the furthest extreme. I took a machine, imaged it to the same image as the floating desk machines, and went to town planning all the restrictions needed. BIOS locked with password, boot to USB disabled, chassis locked and closed, no CMOS reset, auto login to a generic sales account, USB disabled in Windows, desktop redirected to a folder on the file server with locked permissions, no delete, specific icons only, Chrome browser only, no Internet Explorer or anything else, Chrome bookmark set to only what is needed, log off removed, only restart or shut down. Even if he did manage to somehow log off, it would just log back into sales, and a litany of other basic Windows restrictions that essentially silos the machine to either Chrome or their car sales software. I brought all my changes and my purchase requisition for the locks over to management and was approved with no questions. I sold it as a necessary security measure and threw my weight around about how this is in my job description to address it and implement it. Spent an early Monday morning rolling out all the changes before he came in. Late afternoon rolls around and he finally shows up. I'm off the clock, but decided to stay to see the fallout. He walks in, makes a beeline to his desk, and watched as he sat confused at everything. I can't log out. I can't boot my USB. Windows can't see my USB either. I can't do anything at all. I watched in pure satisfaction as he just got up from the chair and walked around the sales floor aimlessly with nothing to do. The bonus part is, after all the changes, whenever a different salesperson complained about the changes, all I needed to say was, "Sorry for the inconvenience. The changes were necessary due to a salesperson messing with the computers." I'm not allowed to say who it was though, so unfortunately the changes will need to stay. They all knew who it was though. Oh my gosh, heaven forbid this person might actually have to, I don't know, try and sell some cars or something. One interesting thing to note though is that if you're in a workplace that has their computers locked down this tight, but you don't seem like there's a reason that they should be locked down this tight, well, it was a person like this. They are usually the reason. This next story comes to us from Wise Old Llama Man. Want me to talk to your other customers? Will do. Let's jump right in. A tiny bit of background. My family recently moved into a new neighborhood that we chose because we loved the neighbors. When we were touring the house, C came over and told us he'd mow our lawn for us. J told us all about the kids who our kid would make friends with, and X invited us over for a cookout. We try to be good neighbors too. Our front yard is where the neighbor kids know they can come and play in the shade with our dog and our kid. We installed a small but growing garden as an excuse to be outside and chat with our neighbors. I'm about halfway through baking brownies for everyone on our little cul-de-sac as a thank you for the warm welcome we've received. This neighborhood is a place where folks look out for each other, in part because most of us know we are the people who keep us safe. Story time. The other day, I was sitting outside watching my kid play with his best friend on our block and friend's older brother. Older brother was asking me about our garden as an excuse to tell me all about what he was learning about pollinators. My kid makes a break for the street, so I run after him and pick him up. No cars ever go by, but we're trying to teach him road safety early. As I'm carrying him back into the house, older brother is still talking to me when he's interrupted by someone with a branded shirt and a clipboard. I immediately tell the shirt that I'm not interested in buying anything, to which he replies that he's not trying to sell me anything. He launches into his apparently non-sales pitch for the home security system he sells and tells me all the details for the video doorbell that several of my neighbors have been installing. Now, in case you didn't know, big security systems like Amazon Ring and ADT regularly hand over all the video footage to the police without requiring any sort of warrant from them. That's not to mention that several groups have been discovered listening into your conversations in the name of transcribing them. I ask him how his company avoids compromising my data, a question he dodges by scrunching up his face and moving on with his pitch. When I press him on it, he lies to me based on what I already know about his company that uses orange signs. He then tells me that C, J, and X sent him over here because they said I was nice, implying that because I won't accept his lie, somehow I'm the here. After interrupting my conversation with the neighbor kid as I'm holding a baby I'm obviously trying to take inside, lying to me, and now trying to guilt me into a system I don't want and believe is bad for my community, we reach an impasse. He falls back to say, well, C, J, and X have had it installed, talk to them. Cue malicious compliance. I proceed to go over to C, J, X, and one other neighbor, also C. He sells the product to by the end of the day, and have a normal friendly chat with them. I slide into the conversation that I don't care for that company because of the way that they hand over data to the cops and can listen in at any time. Fast forward to today, when every neighbor except also C has taken down their orange sign and had the system uninstalled. I think also C never had it installed, but is keeping the sign up just as a potential deterrent. So if you're reading, shirt, if you had just been honest with me, I wouldn't have felt the need to quite so aggressively share my concerns. You would have just lost out on one sale rather than the whole neighborhood. Yeah, OP, I don't think it really matters to the guy in the shirt at that point because if the system's already installed and running, it means they've paid their fees, which is likely a fee for the whole first year. The company's not just going to come back out and take it all back and say, yep, here's your money back. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. You'd probably be better off talking to your neighbors that don't have the system installed already, so they can do some research and make an informed decision on whether they want that product or not. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.